Hi guys, welcome to Love and Lust Audiobooks channel, updated daily with great audiobooks. So please subscribe to me if you don't want to miss it. Well, let's go to read this book, Stolen by the Rival Alpha, Part 1, Chapter 1 to 10. Chapter 1, Souls as a Breeder. Prologue. Connor tilted his head, crooking a knuckle under my chin to examine my face. You're pretty, Gemma. I suppose, just don't look at me while we do it. Blue eyes unnerve me. I contemplated snapping at his fingers, stroking my cheek, but no, I had to bide my time. I knew why Raisa had given me her knife and offered me up to Connor. Be a wolf, be an actor. The last thing I saw as the double doors closed behind me was Raisa's terrified face and her lips mouthing the words. Do it. Do it, kill him. Remember, Connor murmured, eyes raking me up and down as if I was already naked. This is what you are here for. It's why you came to protect your cousin, was it? I swallowed hard. How did he know? Very selfless of you. Connor started to lower himself, his face coming closer until I went cross-eyed. Close your eyes. She-wolf. Whatever I do to you, it will be a pleasant surprise. Could I do it? Could I try to kill Connor Herrick? The beast of the West, the war ruler who decimated most of the West. I was half naked and crushed beneath the most dangerous shifter in the world. Little Opal Springs, me had agreed to this like a stupid, reckless pup, thinking it would be an adventure. Visiting beautiful places, living luxuriously, all with a handsome, doting male. Oh, how wrong I was to dream of that. The knife slipped out from under me and onto the floor with a dissonant clatter. Oh no. Connor locked his gaze on mine. A moment ago, his eyes had been hazy with lust. Now they were crystal, sharp with controlled fury. Do it, Gemma. I hit the floor mat with a grunt and a flare of dull pain. One moment, I was facing Carrie. The next, I was staring up at the ceiling that I was sure wasn't supposed to be spinning. Ouch. A hand reached out for me to take. I took it, hauling myself up with Kara's help. After she steadied me and my vision wasn't doubled, my best friend laughed. You're supposed to block a punch, remember? I'm vaguely aware, I said, fighting a smile to match hers. Usually opponents don't try to crack inappropriate jokes before they attack. At least, that's what I've heard. Carrie rolled her eyes and pulled me to the sidelines of the Epsilon training room, where more 2-on-2 practice combats were going much more successfully. We sat on a bench so Carrie could dab my raw cheek with a damp cloth. I hissed at the contact, but the sting came and went. I went to thank her when she said, "You've been distracted lately, Gemma. Are you okay?" I blinked, knitting my brows at her. Of course I'm okay. I haven't been distracted. What would I be distracted from anyway? I wake up, I go to school and train, go home, eat, sleep, and do it all over again. She knitted her brows back, not surprised by my bitter tone. This wasn't the first time I'd complained about the monotony of my life. I don't know, you just seem off. I contemplated telling her about the repeating dream I'd been having for the past week. Kari Mayan was my best friend, and though we shared the same blue eyes and long, sandy blonde hair, we weren't sisters, but we were just as good at, meaning that she knew me as well as myself and knew when something was bothering me. I sighed in defeat. I've been having this weird dream the past few nights. I can't really describe it, there's not too much to describe. All I remember is a moon over a desert, and the sand is all bloody in a thin line that kind of looks like a long ribbon. And there's no matter how many times I dreamt it, the details were still fuzzy and nothing really happened. There's a shadow walking toward me, but that's all. Kari seemed to think hard. That's very ominous. You know, it could be a sign. Well, maybe you could find your You two stopped chatting. We jumped when the Epsilon trainer shouted, stalking toward us. His voice sharp. Brooks, what are you even doing here? Just because Alpha Baron is your uncle does not mean you can sneak into lesson. I jumped to my feet. I know I didn't make the cut. No, said the trainer barked out. You didn't. The trainer stopped me with a hand, but his tone softened to exasperation. The war in the West changed the entire world, Gemma. We all grew up with it. 12 years is half of your life by now. It's clear that you aren't equipped for leaving the East, but that's all right. Most of your cousins didn't get accepted either. Ever since the rivalry between the two largest packs of the West, the continent across the wide ocean, flared into a full-out war, every young shifter in the East, even little old Opal Springs, was forced to learn the ways of a warrior, how to fight and protect their family and their pack with the potential to join the Epsilons. The elite military force formed to defend pack borders. Each pack had one, and their members were fiercely trained and equally loyal to their alpha leader. And if you failed to complete more than 3 trials within 3 years, you could say goodbye to any of your hopes of becoming a defender. My body and mind just weren't made to be a soldier. After failing all 3 trials, I was left with the only other choice for those who failed: settle down and do nothing. That was over-exaggerating, but that was how I had always viewed it. They're the Beta Havlok's pups, I pointed out. They're the royal family, in case you weren't born knowing that. They don't need to be a part of the army that defends them. Gemma scowled, Carrie elbowing me. I shrugged and shook my head. Sorry, I'll take my leave. I started to walk away when Carrie caught my arm. I looked back at her with an immediate rush of gratitude. I'm coming with you. Together, we washed up and changed into clean clothes before leaving the training hall connected to the school. The Pack's training academy towered over the small forum that was the heart of Opal Springs. My lovable yet tiny and sequestered village. All ages and studies were housed inside, including everything from sewing lessons for pups to Epsilon training. I credited the school with the best and worst years of my life, but my hard work was close to paying off any day. Now I would be offered a teaching position in Oceantide Pack's capital city, Lyrehaven. It was huge, full of opportunities and hundreds of other shifters, and miles away from here. And most temptingly, adventure life outside a sleepy little town. Obviously, I would accept without hesitation. We stepped out onto the sandstone street that was already baking in the summer heat. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was pale blue and cloudless, gulls calling overhead, sailing on their white wings toward the blue sea. That was the one perk of being in such a small town. It was secluded away from the West and away from invaders. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salty air. It took away my negative emotions just as the wind carried the gulls. When I opened them, Carrie's hand was outstretched for me to take. I matched her smile and took her hand as we headed to grab a snack of bacon strips and sit on the edge of the massive circular fountain with a howling wolf in the center spouting water. Not minding the heat of the stone, and eavesdropped on the group of young females on the other side chattering. Did you hear the white-toothed beta's daughter was sent to be a breeder for Rose One's alpha? One said in a hushed voice. Really, another gasped. Lucky a third side dreamily. Raisa is so handsome. And she's so pretty. Imagine how beautiful their babies will be. White-toothed to Rosewen that I admired, that was a 4-day trip by train from another small town to the grand city of roses. I'd never been there, but the talk of their rose wine was enough for me to want to pack up and head out. The first chance I got. I munched on my bacon strip and glanced at Carrie doing the same. Her face tipped up toward the sun. Being a breeder for handsome faraway alpha would be a great excuse to see, well, anything, I said. Carrie choked on her bacon and stared at me with wide eyes. You a breeder? Say it with more judgment. Why don't you? You're the last wolf I'd imagine settling down to have pups for some haughty pack leader. I shrugged, unoffended by the callous remark. If I please him enough, I can get him to take me anywhere. Think of all the places we've heard of and never get to visit. I wouldn't have to be judged for not making the epsilon cut. I could still be a teacher, couldn't I? My thoughts ran wild with possibility. I wouldn't be a Luna alongside whichever alpha it was, which was perfectly fine, but I'd be pampered in luxury, able to roam villages or cities, and all I'd have to do was produce an heir or two. I never imagined having pups unless I'd found my fated mate, but it was a small price to pay for an entirely new life of freedom. Besides, I continued, maybe he could end up being my mate. Kari hummed, maybe it's happened before, I think. My excitement fizzled when I registered her serious tone. My best friend's head was suddenly hung, shoulders slouched. It sent a shock of dread down to my soul's core because this was not my best friend. Kara was not born to hang her head in any negative emotion or let her shoulders be anything but confident. Unlike me, Carrie was built to be and was a warrior through and through. She passed epsilon training with flying colors and was chosen to join the force by the beta without hesitation. In fact, she was the top student. I never envied her. I only supported her strength and determination. So it rattled me to see her suddenly sad and meek. Who are you, and what happened to my best friend? I demanded, taking her hand. Carrie skewed her mouth. She was holding back tears. My heart lurched. What's wrong? My parents died in the war. I knitted my brows. Her parents had both been high-ranked Epsilon warriors 10 years ago, but had died aiding Ocean Tide's ally, the Sun Mountain Pack, against the Hazel Coast Pack. Yeah. And you know, it's been a year since I was chosen. They still hadn't given me an assignment. Kari looked up at me and swallowed hard. Well, they gave me one yesterday. I squeezed her hand. Well, you hid these tears pretty good. Where are they sending you? I dreaded asking the question and dreaded the answer even more. Kari opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a wail of despair echoed through the courtyard. Someone came flying out from between two buildings, fleeing across the entire square toward beachside. I almost ignored her had I not registered. It was Lynn. I jolted to my feet to run after her without thinking. Kari snatched my wrist to stop me and protested. Hey, this is important, Gemma. I know, I said, hastily watching Lynn disappear around the corner, but that's not good. Your cousin's as impulsive as you are, Gem, Kari said. Voice now edged. She's 16, whatever it is. It's probably something she'll get over by the end of the day. My gut told me it wasn't nothing because it was true. Lynn was rebellious and overdramatic most of the time, so fleeing from somewhere in tears wasn't too out of character, but something felt very wrong. I tugged free of Carrie's grip, making her gasp at the audacity. Sorry, Carrie, I have to check on her. I'll be right back, I promise, Gemma. But I was already sprinting down the street after Lynn. At the last second, I caught sight of her swerving off the street onto a sand path toward the beach. I followed and nearly blew right past her. She hid behind a tree trunk. I skidded to a stop. Lynn, my cousin yelped and then clamped a hand over her mouth. Gemma. Yeah, it's me. I hid with her and brushed her hair out of her eyes. What happened? She sniffed and didn't hold back in saying, I've been sold. What? Sold, she repeated furiously, as a breeder, to who I was too speechless to say much else. My thoughts were warped with disgust and shock. You're only 16. I don't know. I ran away before the alpha could tell me, Gemma, I don't want to go. I can't. I won't. Lynn was sobbing now. And I didn't blame her. Our own Uncle Barun had sold his niece, his youngest one, no less, for what? Money and protection. Likely. I had no problem calling our alpha the same as most of the others, power-hungry and desperate. And it was only heightened by the war. Selling Lynn offering her, he probably phrased it must have some beneficial gain. My family sickened me. It was a lightning-quick realization. But not as fast as the words from my mouth. I'll go. I'll take your place. I had no way of knowing if I would regret those words more than anything, or if they would lead me right to my destiny. Chapter 2. Not what she was expecting, Gemma. I said it without thinking. No, I said it because I'd already thought about it. Was it destiny that I'd been considering that potential life only minutes ago? Lynn stared at me with rubbed red eyes, tears streaking down her face. What she croaked. I'll go, I repeated as adrenaline spread through my veins like ice water in your place. Are you crazy? I grinned at her and shrugged. Clearly, I took her hands again. You don't want this. I do. It's an easy solution. Just go back to Uncle Boran. Let him give you the rest of the information. Lynn squirmed. Actually, he already did. I released her so she could pull out a piece of paper from her back pocket and hand it to me. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Nothing was written on it except for a date and time to arrive at Firthport to depart on the galliot headed west. The West ravaged by war, it was a lawless, massive continent. There were probably hundreds of packs who knew how many alphas needed heirs. At least some of them had to be exactly what I dreamed of. My luck just had to be good enough to get one. But if it wasn't what I dreamed of, and the alpha was a royal fur brain, then I would still agree. I would never subject Lynn to that. I folded the paper back up and beamed at my cousin. Works for me. She was looking at me as if I was indeed insane. It's in a week, Gemma. Enough time for me to get my affairs in order. A plan scrawled itself into my mind, coming together far too easily. I'll work things out with Carrie first. Then I'll tell my dad that I'm leaving to restore our honor by serving an alpha who will do what you were sold in exchange for. Oh, that sounds terrible. Lynn laughed deliriously, probably money and protection from someone in the West. I figured as much. The very thought of selling your own family member, like livestock, made me sick to my stomach. It only enforced my desire to distance myself from them. You're worth more than brainless males think you are. She barked another laugh and wiped away the last of her tears. You're serious. You're willing to drop everything to cross the entire ocean to make pup. I was ready to make a joke, but I found myself saying, if it's to spare you from that fate. Yes. Lynn's lower lip started to tremble. Then she flung her arms around me and rasped. Thank you, Gemma, for saving me from a terrible fate. When I returned to the fountain after walking Lynn back home, Karani was gone. I jogged to her aunt's house where she lived. I banged on the door and called her name, but no one was home. I'd missed her when she needed to talk to me. Guilt was creeping up on my excitement as I made my way back to my own home. Lynn was right. Leaving my entire life behind was scary as hell. But the benefits outweighed the doubts. New shifters to meet, new places to see, adventure. I could protect my family and my pack, even if it was through an inhumane trade. I wasn't upset about my teaching position. It hadn't even been offered yet. I wouldn't miss most of Opal Spring. To the moon goddess's hell with the alpha and beta. I would never call them uncles again. I would miss my mother and father, but they knew how restless I was. And if they saw I could do something productive with my mundane life rather than spend it lounging around their house, then surely they would support that. I entered through the front door. I didn't hear any voices or heartbeats, but there was a note on the kitchen table with Mom's handwriting on it. Gemma, we're visiting your Uncle Boran in Lyre Haven. Sorry for the short notice. We'll be back in a week. Take care. I didn't expect my throat to constrict with tears so fast. I would start on the path of adventure, but I wouldn't be able to say goodbye to my parents. I knocked on Carrie's door the next day. Her aunt said she wasn't there and wasn't sure where she was. I sensed it was a lie right away, but didn't press, figuring she'd already gone to training since I slept in late again. But she wasn't there when I peeked my head in. I asked our small group of friends if they'd seen her. Their answer of no was undoubtedly true. I went to all of our usual hangouts, but she was nowhere to be found. The next day was the same, and the next day, and 3 days after that. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head. Her uncharacteristic behavior, her revelation that they finally gave her a real Epsilon assignment, her reminder of her parents, and I'd completely blown her off. I knew what happened, and the knowledge sat like a pit in my stomach. She had already gone. Carrie Mayan was deployed somewhere, and we didn't even get to say goodbye. Lynn didn't know a single thing about the entire process of becoming a breeder, other than the places and times where she would meet someone. Her father, Havelock Brooks, who was Oceantide's beta, planned to take her on the train to Lyrehaven and drop her off at Firthport, where someone would be there to make the trade. The trick was to leave before he even woke up for breakfast. It was easy. Lynn just snuck out her bedroom window and showed up in her dad's hijacked car. I answered with the bag slung over my shoulder, ready. Lynn quirked a smile. The real question is, are you? Since there were very few to say goodbye to, I sent in a letter to school to deny any teaching position they may have offered me due to a new opportunity in the city. A second letter I left on the kitchen table said, I'm sorry for the short notice to ask Hafelku where I am. I'm doing this for our family. I love you both so much. It was only half an hour's drive to the train station when we got there. Lynn parked, sighed heavily, and looked at me with dew eyes and a trembling lower lip. You don't have to do this. I took in the small station bustling with other shifters. The train was an iron beast of a thing puffing white smoke, its cars numbering only 10. It would take me straight to Lyrehaven's Firthport, where I would depart across the ocean to an entirely different continent. Not a single thing was or would be familiar to me. I'd never even been on a ship before. But there was nothing better than the feeling of excitement from taking risks. I knew from the moment I got on that train, I wouldn't come down from this adrenaline rush easily. I grinned at my young cousin. I do and I want to. I'm ready for the adventure of a lifetime. I felt my smile start to fade just as quickly. There's not much left for me back at Opal Springs now, Lynn. This is the best thing for me and you. You're the beta's daughter. You can honor our family in more ways than just being breeding stock. Her eyes shone. Really? Really? I leaned forward to kiss the crown of her head, pulling back. I gave another smile. Opal Springs to Firthport, Lyrehaven to whatever the West's main port is. Easy as that. Look for someone waiting for a young Opal Springs female, and then the rest is history. Lynn chewed her lip, unsure what to say, then she flung her arms around my neck in a strangling hug. I love you, Gem. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I laughed as tears sprang to my eyes, hugging her back fiercely. You're welcome, though. I should be thanking you for this opportunity. You always did want to get out of here. We pulled apart. You know me so well. I said, let's just hope the switch doesn't affect you too much. Lynn chewed the inside of her cheek and wouldn't meet my eyes. He'll probably be secretly glad. Then she smiled. I'll tell your parents that they deserve a hardworking daughter and that she's going to make our family proud. Because even a pairing like this strengthens allyship. I told her, just a little worried at her sudden hesitation. The train whistle blew. Well, that's my cue. Goodbye, Lynn. It's not forever, I promise. We hugged one more time before I got out and headed toward the station. As I looked back to wave, Lynn stuck her head out the window and shouted, Good luck. Name your first pup after me. I barked a laugh and called back. I watched her drive away as I hurried onto the boarding platform. Nothing was needed to board, so I hopped on effortlessly. The adrenaline started to trickle through my veins as I took in the interior. Dozens of seats clothed in ocean, blue velvet on either side of an aisle with a white runner carpet, with little lanterns shaped like lighthouses swinging from the center. The smells wreathed my senses: iron smoke, seafood wine, several fabrics, and unfamiliar shifter scents. Several passengers were already seated and staring at me as I blocked the aisle to look around like an idiot. When someone shoved me from behind, I lost my footing and fell into the nearest seat. Luckily, it was empty, but as the shover snickered and passed, I bared my teeth and cursed them out. It wasn't enough to dampen my mood. I scooted to the next seat over to see out the window because Moon Goddess bless her own work. The coast was beautiful. That was one thing I did know, the white sand that felt almost smooth as it filtered through one's fingers. The lapping of the Ace waters over shells, the eastern sun glinting off the distant wave. I swallowed hard and looked away. Please, Moon Goddess, I begged to myself quietly. Let the West have just as much water. Please let this alpha, whoever he'll be, have a beachside palace. The trip to Oceantide's capital took an hour. I rested my forehead on the window and felt myself bake through the glass as I watched the landscape fly by. The ocean passed, giving way to grassy coastal plains, mountains rising in the distance, and finally, boom, there was Lyre Haven just ahead. The train veered gently away, and a few minutes later, the station came into view. A few minutes after that, it chugged to a stop, so I hopped off and was immediately engulfed by the crowd. Instantly, I was suffocating from too much movement, too many sounds and scents, too much to look at. No shifter looked the same, unlike Opal Springs where everyone had similar features and there were signs everywhere. I gritted my teeth. No, I wouldn't be overwhelmed. I wouldn't shy away from all the newness I wanted to explore. I had to be brave. Squaring my shoulders and gripping my bag tight, I forged through the crowd. I saw a sign that said Firth Port and turned to follow the pointing arrow. I kept my head high and my gaze ahead to fool anyone into believing that I knew exactly where I was going. And it worked, because a few minutes later, I was standing on a boardwalk with a dozen ships docked and swaying on the gentle water. My jaw nearly dropped at the size of them giant wooden hulls, towering white sails, spider webs of golden rope. Hey, you, Sandy. The shout was so loud that I turned reflexively. I immediately met the harsh eyes of a broad male in a sharp black outfit. He stalked toward me, the crowd seeming to part around him. I tensed, my body telling me to prepare for either fight or flight. You the Beta's daughter from Opal Springs? He asked in a bar. Yes, I said. Automatically from here on out, I was supposed to be Lynn Brooks. When the male grinned just a little too wide, my heart lurched, and I suddenly knew I was not safe anymore. That's when the sack came over my head and everything went dark. Chapter 3, Behind Enemy Line. Gemma. Out of all the things that could happen to me in my life, I never expected to be kidnapped. My kidnapper refused to call it that. He lounged on the couch opposite mine, the picture of ease with legs crossed and a short glass of whiskey in one hand, retrieving, picking up, acquiring. Choose your synonym. Spring. Captured. I snapped the opposite of at ease. 2 days into the trip, the galliot sailing a smooth path toward the west. Any hope I'd had of the excitement of adventure was dashed by the constant annoyance that was Graylin. Despite his hostile appearance, he was never short of a smart remark. He lifted a shoulder, unaffected by my bad attitude that had been my consistent response to his snarky personality. I follow orders, no feelings attached. Graylin's hazel eyes were sharper than a chipped shell, dusky brown hair slicked back and shaved on the sides, looking far too crisp and neat of a male to terrify someone when he smiled so charmingly, even if it bared pointed canine. After that first interaction, I refused to be intimidated by him and his much quieter cohort Hadley, who sat on another couch in the corner. We had an entire parlor to ourselves with plush carpet and were surrounded by windows that overlooked miles and miles of ocean. At the present moment, it was dawning on sundown, so the room was flooded with rich orange light as the sun descended below the horizon. Whose orders I demanded. "You've asked me a dozen times already, Springs," said Graylin with a long-suffering sigh as he sipped from his glass. "And I'm gonna say the same thing." He wants to remain anonymous. 'Cause yeah, but what? He fixed me with a flat look. "If you knew, you'd have jumped ship by now." The words sent a trill of unexpected fear down my spine. I swallowed hard and faced the window. Those miles and miles of ocean, they went miles down just as much as they went across. Suddenly, I was clinging to my far-fetched dream of a loving alpha on a beachside mansion, with all I had left. Grillin chuckled, satisfied with my lack of response. "We're far from your sad little town, so grow some sharper teeth, little one, or you'll never survive in the West." It took another entire day and a half to reach the port, whose name Grillin wouldn't tell me. When we docked midday, I was in the sleeveless white silk top and black shorts, far too short to be modest, that they'd given me. They'd taken away my bag from the second they'd kidnapped me, so now I really had nothing. Just like that, I'd lost the last remnant of home, of everything I knew. With Graylin leading and his silent cohort behind me to make sure I didn't bolt, we got off the ship with a few other passengers and took no break to continue down the long boardwalk until it was suddenly flagstone. We were in the ruins of a city, neighbor Graylin said, without looking back, the last neutral stronghold in the West. I didn't really know what that meant, but it was likely no one's claim because of how desolate it was, with rundown stores, with front windows shattered, garbage scattered across the potholed streets, a sickly stench permeating the air. But when we turned into a large center square where the shattered statue's shards were left in the dying garden around it, there was suddenly a bustling crowd. If Hadley hadn't grabbed my scruff, I'd have been swept up in the sea of bodies. I still tripped though, but it wasn't because I'd lost my footing. It wasn't because someone shoved me. It was because I felt something inside me. Blurt. It made the hair on my arm stand on end and the back of my neck prickle like electricity. It was a feeling that you got when you were being watched. Hadley released me when I whirled around. I scanned the crowd frantically for the one shifter who was staring at me. And I found him, the only other shifter who'd completely stopped, a steady force resilient to the chaos around them. Everything in my vision blurred. Nothing was in focus, except the male 20 feet away. I could see his shaggy white blonde hair, half hiding stormy gray eyes in sharp clarity, as if my own eyes decided I didn't need to see anything except him, like he was the only thing that mattered. Everything in my body stilled as we watched each other. Minutes seemed to pass within seconds. Something told me that I needed to. I was grabbed by the arm and yanked back so violently that I almost fell to the ground. Another arm jerked me up to standing, shoving me straight out of the throng into a side alley. I tried to turn back but was blocked by Graylin, who snarled, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "That male," I bumbled. "There's too many of them out there." Graylin barked, "There's only one who matters now, and he's the one you're promised to for a nice price. I get paid for delivering you unhurt, so do not pull any shit to put that at risk. Let's go." He yanked me again harshly. I had no choice but to let him drag me along. We left the square behind, but now there was a word floating around in my mind that I just couldn't latch onto. What was it? What was it trying to say from the moment I locked that male's gaze? Graylin simmered the entire train ride, but I could tell he was pleased by my silence. It was only half an hour's travel, and when it slowed and then jerked to a stop, I jolted out of a daze. I looked out of the window and my throat tightened. It was like the ocean, endless miles of the same thing, except this time it was dirt, flat, cracked dirt with no more than 5 cactuses. Heat waves shimmered in the air. The warm weather in the east was apparently nothing compared to that of the west. "We're getting off," Hadley growled at me. I started and looked out the opposite windows, but there's no station. Exactly. I dodged and got to my feet before he could grab me, following Grelin out from where he waited at the car's door. He hopped out and surprisingly offered a hand, but I pointedly refused and jumped out onto the ground myself. The heat hit me like a wall, and I struggled to take a breath. It was humid and dry and stale. Finally, a male voice sighed loudly. "You're frefting late." Hadley's shoulder checked me forward. I nearly stumbled into someone had they not caught and steadied me with hands to my upper arm. Little Beatrice tried to make a run for it at Niebuhr, Grelin muttered. I went to snap back that it wasn't true, but when I looked up at who gripped me just a little too tightly, I felt all the fight in my body freeze. His grin was a little too wide, his green gold eyes a little too vivid. And the first thing my brain told me was, "Oh, don't piss him off, or else." "Opal Springs," he said, voice as raspy as sand on stone, "some tiny beachside village." He quirked his head and sniffed before wrinkling his nose. "She smells like rotten seafood. Did you idiots let her shower?" I showered. I answered before they could ripping free of his grasp. "You smell like." Behind me, Grayling grabbed my scruff. "Do not finish that sentence. You're speaking to Beta Cillian Kael." I looked from him to his offered hand and back. I knew the name. He was the beta of the Hazel Coast pack. Hazel Coast was the biggest pack in the West, and it was at war with the Sun Mountain pack. Ocean Tide allied with Sun Mountain. Cillian Kael bared his canines in a wider smile. Of course he knew that. My heart started to pound adrenaline through my veins. It suddenly felt like this was a much bigger, more important trade than I thought it was. I steeled myself and shook Cillian's hand. It was large and dry as bone. "Do you know my name? Does your alpha?" "Brooks is all he and I know," said the beta, brow raising as I pulled my hand free. "Your father made quite the bargain for you." "Why me?" I asked before I could stop myself. Cillian looked at Graylin and Hadley behind me. "Is she always this defiant?" A few days, and I was ready to bite my own leg off. I glared at Graylin over my shoulder. He shrugged his shoulders, uncaring. "He'll love that," Cillian sighed under his breath. "Do you want us to know your name? If not, you remain Brooks." Using Lynn's name would cause more problems than one, so I decided to claim all past and future faults. "People just call me Gemma." Plain Cillian said flatly, looking me up and down, stripping me with his gaze. It wasn't a sexual kind of scan, it more seemed like he was deciding how much time he could stand with me before doing something sinister. "Let's go." He turned on his heel and started walking toward what I hadn't noticed until now. 3 massive cars that looked vaguely like tanks, which I had only seen in textbooks. Then I saw why we'd gotten off the train in the middle of nowhere. The track ended, was destroyed, the metal rusty and twisted, the last wood planks in splinters. "As you can see," Cillian said, opening the back door for me, "the beasts of the sun don't like efficient modes of transportation. Why your water-loving packmates side with them is beyond me," but he continued with that too, wide smile. "We place that all behind with you. Gemma, inside you go." I stepped forward hesitantly, glancing back at Graylin and Hadley, who hadn't moved. "You're not coming." Graylin said hell no, and hauled himself back onto the train as it was already chugging slowly backward. There went my last chance of ever returning home. I got into the car, Cillian closing the door and getting into the passenger seat ahead of me. He twisted to look at me. "Welcome to the West, Gemma Brooks. I hope you like dust." Chapter 4, Who Bought Me? Gemma. The car ride was long, bumpy, and yes, dusty. It gave me a long time to think of nothing but that male I had seen in the square. His stormy gray eyes wouldn't leave my mind's eye. I hadn't been able to discern any emotion in them, but I thought that if I never let the image go, I'd be able to figure it out. "What do you know of the West?" Cillian asked me. I wasn't sure how to feel or what to think at this point, so I just told the truth. That Hazel Coast and Sun Mountain have been at war for the past 20 years. It doesn't have as much advancement as the East, and it's very large. Cillian's laugh was sharp, short, and humorless. "It's all right to call us archaic. Trains, cars, anything metal, it's all just defying our roots. We're wolves, Gemma Brooks. Why waste our teeth and claws in this war? The last thing we need is better, faster transportation. The iron smells horrible too." The beta couldn't have been more than 50 years old, I deduced, judging by his profile alone. His rich tanned skin looked dry and was thinly wrinkled from sun exposure, and his light brown hair was short and choppy and streaked with gray. Such normal features for someone who gave off cold and calculated air. He also seemed like he liked to hear himself talk, but we boast our military might. Teeth and claws are all you need to win. He looked back at me. "Do you think you'd like to embrace the archaic?" "Sure," I said, unable to find any other response. Cillian glanced at the driver, as if checking to see if he was as disappointed with the answer as he was. "Sharp claws, teeth, and a razor-sharp tongue," he said. "That's what it takes to stay alive here. Pretty take care of who you cut with it, or try to." Just as I was about to claim sickness, way too much voyaging for long periods of time in moving transportation, Cillian said, "Ah, home sweet home." I peered out the window. We'd been driving along a cliff for the past few minutes, seemingly endless and empty, and I'd been pretending it was my own East Sea, even though somehow it looked nothing like the ocean I knew. But now the end was in sight, a jutted-out bluff with a massive sandstone fortress overlooking a black sand beach. Well, screw the moon goddess. My dream wasn't so stupid after all. The dirt road curved all the way to a plain, sudden front entrance of 2 double doors with giant gaslight torches on either side that were making shadows dance on the dry grass. There were 2 guards below them, and as the car came to a stop, I found 5 more on the battlements and 2 on the circular turret. "I guessed when you were at war, you protected your home with all you had." The car stopped and Cillian opened the door for me. I climbed out, immediately struggling to breathe again. Cillian chuckled. I decided I hated the sound. "This is the freshest air you'll get. Don't cough too hard when dust coats your lung." As he strutted toward the entrance, I stuck my tongue out at him and thought, one day I'll show you how sharp it can be. The 2 guards dressed in brown armor with a sigil of a wolf head with a bone in its mouth, the lower halves of their faces hidden by a realistic painted black wolf muzzle mask with the bared teeth painted red, opened the doors inward. With a great echoing groan. I wasn't sure that I signed up for a fancy entrance, but for a selfish, delirious moment, I'd basked in the grandeur of it. But I didn't get lost in that. The driver nudged me from behind. I stumbled forward to follow Cillian, deciding not to glare over my shoulder as I crossed the threshold into an entirely new world. My whole life was modest, grounded in modesty. This was on the opposite side of the scale. There was silver and gold coating every inch of the foyer that could have fit every damn wolf in Opal Springs inside. I craned my neck as far as it would go to see the ceiling that dripped a massive gold chandelier with a dozen lit red candles. While speechlessly gorgeous, it all seemed quite unnecessary. Luxurious furniture with dark cherry-colored end tables with vases on either side, a fireplace, as long as the car was wide, all atop a black marble floor with veins of red. Then again, alphas were not known to be humble. Welcome to Hazelstone. I jumped and whirled at the smooth female voice. Announced Cillian, sounding obnoxiously welcoming. You're right on time, Raisa. Ahead was a stupidly wide staircase. Coming down, it was a curvy female dressed in the skimpiest outfit I'd ever seen, if you could even call it that. It was more a near sheer scrap of fabric held up by a silver chain around the back of her neck that pushed up her breasts. Tied around the center of it was less sheer silk that fell down her front, just shy of dragging on the ground. Meaning there was a double slit, bearing both her legs and bare feet. I hoped there was another scrap hiding her privates, because if she moved too fast and the silk swayed with her skin was a rich gold with a rosy glow, her peachy blonde hair falling in gentle waves down her back that I hoped was covered at least a little. Her green eyes were a pale shade that reminded me of sea glass. She was so breathlessly beautiful that I momentarily forgot about the mysterious male in Nibird Square. Sea glass was smooth and round, but it could be jagged and sharp too. I watched her gaze turn from demure to disgust, and the sweet bow of her mouth directed at me flipped to a somehow still beautiful curl of disdain at Cillian when he walked past her up the stairs. Just as effortlessly, she turned back to me with flawless poise, as if she hadn't just shown a very snake-like shift. A shiver ran down my spine. But it was hard to feel uneasy when she approached with a gait as elegant as the rest of her. She was at least an entire foot taller than me, and she tipped her chin forward down slightly to meet my gaze. Her expression was pensive and temperate. I'm Raisa Marigold, you're prettier than I imagined. I wasn't sure if it was intended as an insult, but my lack of response made her eyes widen. Oh, sweet, I didn't mean it that way. She tucked my hair behind my ear. Even her fingers were elegant. Westerners tend to exaggerate Eastern appearances as a pup. I was told those who lived by the sea were somehow disfigured by it. But I am glad you do not have gills. Raisa laughed and Moon Goddess damn it all. That was stunning too. She took my wrist, but compared to the seemingly endless males handling me, she was gentle and guiding, tucking me under her arm in a surprisingly motherly way. She led me up the staircase. What's your name, sweet? Gemma Brooks, I said a little too eagerly of Opal Springs, Oceanside. She beamed, showing perfect white teeth. Gemma, I hope you're as tough as a gemstone. The comment was encouraging, but I sensed a subliminal warning. How terrifying our wolf instincts were. Raisa led me down one dark corridor after another as I quickly realized the foyer was just a ruse, a pretty curtain to hide scarcely lit hallways with wood walls and cold stone floors. We didn't pass a single window even as we went up a long spiral staircase damp with stale water that smelled like something had died and rotted. I loved the beachside fortress. I just really wanted to live outside of it. Raisa, I breathed as we landed on a new floor that was suddenly nicely lit with a velvet runner between the many closed doors. What's going on? Here, she said, instead, stopping at the end of the dead-end hallway. She opened it and ushered me inside, easily closing it behind her and locking it. The room looked like a prison cell disguised as a pretty bedroom, stone floor, stone walls, both emanating icy cold, and a single window barred with thick poles. There was a 4-poster bed surprisingly large with a mountain of fluffy pillows with an ugly cream comforter, a vanity with a stool and grimy mirror, a dresser with 6 drawers, and a separation screen that I could just see a wooden bath behind. I couldn't name all the smells, so I just decided, goddess damned awful. I turned to Raisa with another question on my tongue. but she took my wrist again, blessedly gentle, and guided me across the room to the tub. It was already full of water, but somehow I already knew it would be freezing. Though I doubted she would shove me into it, I dug my heels in and resisted her tug. Raisa, please explain to me what's happening. I was surprised and irritated at the quake in my voice. I sounded timid and naive, and that was the last thing I wanted to be, the last thing I needed to be. If I was going to survive from here on out, if I was to trust Raisa right away, I had to follow her advice. Be tough, be a gemstone. Be sea glass, pretty but capable of being a warning not to seek out, lest you be cut. Be a damn wolf, teeth and claws. The beauty's brows knitted, and she trusted releasing me. I didn't like the troubled expression she gave me. Oh, sweet, why do you think you are here? I didn't like the depth of that question either. It made me second-guess everything from the point I told Lynn I'd go in her place. A breeder. Raisa took my hands and led me to the bed where we both sat. I hated to admit it was softer than my own had been. I'm afraid it's much more complicated than that. Sweet. I swallowed and breathed. Why did I figure that? Raisa crooked her knuckle under my chin to lift my face up to hers. Now her expression had darkened, less motherly and more serious. And do you know who you are here for? Dread was sluicing through me. No. I think you do, but you don't want to admit it. I was quick to another realization. Do not underestimate her. Of course, I knew the name Hazelstone was clue enough. I'd been sold to the Hazel Coast's beast of the West, Alpha Connor Herrick. Chapter 5, The Beast of the West, Gemma. The Hazel Coast and Sun Mountain pacts had been at war for 12 years over. What started as a simple land dispute. 1 year into that, Connor Herrick, only 21 at that time, killed his own father to claim the Alpha title, to dictate the war against Alpha, Cyrus Morven. For a dozen years, they brought ruin to the West, decimating or conquering smaller packs, expanding their own borders for selfish power, hungry reason. I'd heard them be described as psycho or sociopaths who loved sacking villages and stealing females and pups from their homes just for fun. They made usurper slaves or killed them in public execution. As far as I knew, Ocean I'd only sided with Sun and aided with Epsilon warriors because they were the lesser of two evils, which was really saying something. That was what little I was aware of. There were probably 100 more issues and stories and sides. But the gist was that I'd just arrived in the household of the most sadistic alpha to ever walk the earth. At least it wasn't Lynn. What did her own father gain from selling her to the rival of the pack they allied with? Raisa's voice had taken on an edge. You can't show weakness here, Gemma, or there will be hell to pay for it. I will protect you as much as I am able, but I have others to take care of, too. There's more, I blurted, more girls. Her nod was grim. I told you it's more complicated than just giving Connor an heir. He doesn't have one. He has 5 daughters, said Raisa darkly and sadly as if she mourned for them, but he's yet to be given a son. I fear that is why you are here. Why me? My voice came out as a rasp. I cleared my throat and demanded, why me? Why from my tiny little town across an entire continent out of the entirety of Oceanside? Raisa's look was flat. Depends on who your father is. In war, sweet thing, us daughters are worth far less than money, protection, and power. So Raisa knew even less than anyone else about how Lynn had been sold. Did that mean only Alpha Connor knew who Lynn's father was and why he sold Lynn? How did they even get in communication in the first place? It was the least of my worries now. Raisa stood and padded over to the vanity where something red had been folded on the stool. She shook it out and held it up for me to see. You're to wear this for him. I had a feeling that it was just as little fabric as Raisa's outfit. After you bathe, of course, you looked like you were dragged all the way here. She didn't say it unkindly. Setting down the fabric, she took my hand and guided me behind the separation screen. It's warm, I promise. I must have looked doubtful because she laughed and dipped her fingers in to flick me with water droplets. Indeed, they were warm. You can't be shy here. Sweet Raisa told me as she produced a bar of soap from somewhere. Her eyes glanced down, and I got the hint immediately. They look like a decent size, she said shamelessly. I've never been naked in front of another girl, I said hastily, taking a step back. Raisa knitted her brows like she didn't believe me before looking sympathetic. Her sigh was blessedly patient. Then I'll let you scrub yourself. She handed me the soap and walked to the vanity stool, crossing her legs. Even that was elegant. You're not very in touch with your wolf side, are you? She mused as I stripped quickly and climbed into the tub. It must be clean and incontinent, not torn apart by war. I sank to my neck and breathed a sigh of relief. The tub was long enough to easily accommodate my whole body, and the water was a perfect temperature. And after almost 3 days of sitting for hours or being pushed about, a bath was the ultimate form of bliss. After I dunked my head in, I obediently started to scrub with the soap that smelled like sea salt and lavender. No, I admitted, we don't have much need to, but for training or sports. The pups shift far more than anyone else when they play. And I opened my eyes to look at the dark wood ceiling, strung with cobwebs, compared to what little I'd seen of the West so far. My little pocket in the East was paradise. Even with the stories I'd heard from my father, I couldn't piece together what life might be like. The only thing you knew was dust and ruin. Of course, that was making an assumption of Raisa. It's all right, she said. We know what we know, and then we are stripped from it, but we find our strength to survive when we know nothing. I cataloged that advice for later when I may need it. I finished soaping my nooks and crannies. Raisa handed me a towel to dry off. Tie the towel and sit on the stool, she told me. I obeyed as she came up behind me to start to comb my hair, staring at my reflection. I said, I look like I got dragged to another continent. Raisa smiled with fond amusement. I'd imagine you went through a lot to get here. That's an understatement. Then her smile faded a little. We take care of each other here, Gemma, as much as we can. Don't forget that. I tried to meet her eyes, but she was focused on working my hair into one thick braid that she wove a red ribbon through. After that, she dabbed red lipstick onto my lips and lined my eyes with black Kael. I'd rarely worn makeup, and when I did, it had never been this sexy. Luckily, Raisa gave me a bra and underwear to salvage my modesty. She then helped me with the tangle of silk fabric that she called a dress. I preferred to call it what it was and what she wanted to spare me from saying lingerie. When we both looked at the full-length mirror, my face was comically baffled, while Raisa's was unabashedly proud. You look delicious, she beamed. Despite my horror, I couldn't help but admire her work. I'd been transformed from a grimy-looking disaster to looking like I could stop a room in its tracks. That sounded overconfident. I laughed to myself. Really, I only needed to impress one male. The dress was 2 bolts of fabric draped over each shoulder and tied at the waist with a silver chain, almost like a belt. My front was exposed from chest to navel, my sides completely bare, and when I twisted in the mirror, I found that my ass was barely covered. Thank the moon goddess for intimate wear. The last touch Raisa added was a black silk choker. It is part of my job to make you look as desirable as possible. Another is unofficially to protect you, which includes warning you. She put me at arm's length, pinning me with her beautiful stare. When you are with Connor, address him only as Alpha, bat your eyelashes and say as few words as possible. He's prone to anger, so don't talk back. Be on your absolute best behavior. And most importantly, remember that your pack allied with his greatest rival. Considering the fact that I didn't know what was about to happen, her words terrified me, but I lifted my chin and nodded. That satisfied Raisa. He likes to preen, so sneak in a compliment here and there, but keep it minimal. There was a knock on the door. It's time Raisa's expression smoothed into refined indifference. If she had white hair and blue eyes, I'd swear she was the moon goddess herself. She unbolted the door. A tiny female stood with feet together and hands clasped in front of her, wearing an actual dress that covered every inch of her skin, except for her hands and neck. She kept her eyes downcast. "Follow me to the overlook, please." I looked back at Raisa. She nodded encouragement and squeezed my shoulder. "I'll see you for breakfast." I followed what I assumed to call a servant down a maze of different hallways until we abruptly turned into a room, just over half the size of the foyer. At the other end of the room was a long, slightly curved wall made entirely of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bluff. It was evening now, and the room was awash in blue-purple light that mingled with the gas lamps, ringing the wall. In front of the windows were a lounge couch and a side table with a candle whose wax permeated the air with the same scent as the soap, sea salt, and lavender. The servant ordered softly but firmly, giving me a little shove. "When he comes, stand and bow at the waist to greet him." I stumbled forward out of surprise, and when I looked back out of protest, she had already left and closed the door. I was alone, but I sat on the chaise anyway because I could see the ocean. Its gray, blue waters were calm and still, unlike the one I knew that was turquoise and always rolling with gentle waves. Its beach was black sand, not the white that I loved. I wasn't alone for long. The door slammed open. I dodged to my feet and spun on my heel, ready to bow and graciously address him as Alpha. But before I could do either, a harsh hand grabbed my chin and yanked my face up. No textbook or newspapers I had read had any pictures of Connor Herrick or Cyrus Morvan, but my imagination had conjured up a harrowed, scarred face, long, greasy hair, and a body clothed in pelts and wolf teeth pried from the mouths of his enemies. The name Beast of the West itself didn't inspire many positive features. I didn't expect a male so godly handsome that it took my breath away. No, he was like some dark twin of the moon goddess. His hair was as black as the sand on the beach, just above shoulder length, half of it pulled back, bristles shaved in clean lines above and below his severe jawline, brows and lashes dark and dense. His upper lip was peeled back over white teeth, half shifting his canines to be longer and thicker, like his wolf form. He did have scars, 3 long, ropey lines from his temple and ear diagonal, across his cheek to the side of his throat. Claw marks, but they only enhanced his rugged beauty. And the beast's eyes. Oh, those were something to behold. They were hazel, as his pack was so named for, but the flares of gold around the specks of green were more vivid than a sunset. They were captivating eyes, dangerous eyes, because they didn't hold back the well of emotions within him. They pinned me where I stood, looking me up and down like a predator surveying his prey before growling. "You're not who I was promised." It was the deepest voice I'd ever heard, seeming to reverberate through my bones just like the dread that shivered down them. Then he shrugged his shoulders, "But you'll do nonetheless," pinching my chin between his thumb and forefinger. He turned my head this way and that. I was fine with that, but when his hands went straight to my breasts, I instinctively snarled and swatted him away. Connor Herrick observed me flatly, but his mouth was curved in a way I could only describe as poisonous. "Don't be afraid of me, plaything. You're mine now." "Plaything," I repeated in a bark before I could stop myself. His voice was a sensual purr. "Yes." He stalked forward while I stepped backward. "That's why you're here." Raisa's warnings played in my head, but if I didn't say anything, it would only paint me as nothing but meek and submissive. I wouldn't be that. I don't know why I'm here, I said, my back hitting the glass. I used it to lean on, crossing my arms and legs casually. Can you tell me? Connor had to be over 6 feet tall. He stopped when we were chest to chest, my chest level with his midsection, and tilted his chin down to meet my gaze. I held them defiantly, refusing to look away first. He quirked his head in curiosity, narrowing his eyes, mouth frowning. I like it when my things talk back. It's amusing. He jerked his chin. Go on, say something. You've got a lot on your mind. I bit my cheek, the reasonable side of me, knowing I really should just keep my mouth shut. I'm tired, was what I landed on. A muscle in his jaw feathered. No, I sense your irritation. Say something as defiant as your glare. Fine, I dared. I don't want to be here. Connor's sensuous mouth curled back into a smile. Don't worry, you'll come to like it. He brushed my braid over my shoulder, rough fingertips skimming my throat. His gaze burned wherever it landed, and when he met my eyes again, I thought I'd burst into flame. I'll make you like it. Break you if I have to. No matter how long it takes for your defiance to crack. Chapter 6. In hiding. I heard the sound of my fake name but was too stunned to respond to it. I was pushed and shoved by the crowd, some snapping at me to get out of the way, but I couldn't move until that female disappeared into an alley. She struck a chord in the center of my soul. I felt it tug toward her before I even saw her, like a flame in the dark sandy blonde hair, eyes as blue as the faraway eastern sea I imagined. She looked like she'd been caught in a dust storm, disheveled and gaunt, but I thought she was the most beautiful shifter I'd ever seen. But who in the moon goddess's hell was she? And why did she find me as easily as I found her? Kara. The sound of my real name hissed in urgency, finally made me turn just as someone grabbed my scruff and yanked me back into the dark alley where we were supposed to be hiding. I almost stumbled right into Jera, who was glaring at me pointedly. What in the goddess's hell was that, he demanded, shoving me deeper down the alley to avoid being seen. Even the pups know better than to run out in plain sight. I shook off my daze. Sorry, Jera, I don't know what got into me. There was a female. Jera's sigh was part exasperation, part patient. My young friend, now is not the time to be looking for rebellion candidate. Normally, I would have laughed and agreed, but I felt so shaken that I just said, right? He patted my shoulder. We're back to sensible good. Come on, we have what we need. So let's get back. I took one more glance over my shoulder, knowing it was pointless to hope that she would be pushing through the crowd to get to me. What kind of fantasy was that? I laughed to myself. Had I really been so touch-starved that I was dreaming up impossible scenarios now?
The lack of sleep was likely getting to me.
I jogged to catch up to Jera, already peering over the corner building to make sure the coast was clear to dart across the dirt street. There hadn't been any Sun Mountain or Hazel Coast activity in a while. We all deduced that Neighbor had been so drained of all its usefulness that they didn't bother bullying it anymore. But we couldn't afford to be careless lest assassins be hiding in plain sight, really, to slit my throat. I hung behind Jera and muttered she was being escorted or kidnapped, maybe by Hazel Coast Epsilon. Jera stiffened. How do you know? Both warring packs were proud enough to never wear anything but their colors. Not even the assassins who wanted you to know who killed you in the last seconds of your life. Sun Sigil, I told him. Jera swore great clear. We snaked through the sparse stream of shifters to the next alley. After 2 more, we stopped at a boarded-up door of a building that half collapsed on itself years ago. The several wooden slats looked like they would have nailed the doorway shut, but now it was a ruse because they were just stacked loosely atop each other. Jera and I moved a few boards and duped inside, putting them back where they had been. The hallway was cold sandstone near pitch, black without any light sources, but soon it opened up into an empty atrium. The skylight had been shattered, millions of shards of glass glittering across the floor. The only thing in the big space was some scattered stone blocks once used as modern chairs. Now we stacked them to climb onto the second floor and kick them over to hide the evidence. We veered into the fourth hallway on the right and into another boarded door. This one we knocked on 7 times, one for each of my lost family members. A few moments later, a slat level with my shins was pushed off by a tiny hand. Daddy asked a curious young voice. Gerard's serious mood lifted instantly. It's me, pup. Can you push this one? He rapped on the one above it. There were some determined grunts and bare feet scuffling the floor. But eventually, Tara got herself high enough on her toes that she knocked it down. I did it. You did, Jera boomed, setting down all the other slats after handing our gathered supplies to me. Behind the barrier was 2-year-old Tara with her arms already in the air, waiting to be picked up by her father. He scooped her up and spun her around. Her giggle, the purest sound I'd ever heard. Soon you'll be taller than your uncle. I scrunched my nose at Tara to make her laugh again. You think you'll be 6 foot someday? Yes, she said confidently. Not if you keep feeding her only peaches and desert rabbits. I looked up in relief to see Jeichi padding toward us out of the dark. I grinned at her and she took some supplies off me. Hey. Jera ruffled her neat white hair. Thanks. Jeichi rolled her eyes and stuck out her tongue as he squeezed past her. We're 32 dirt for brains. Stop being so immature. Wave at your auntie for me, Tara, he said, his deep voice colored with mischief. Tara did so happily. Jeichi snorted, shaking her head as we fell in step together to continue down the hallway. It had a few spaced-out gas lamps that still worked, even if they didn't give off much light. How did it go? She asked. Though Jera had his proclivity for humor, his twin was stern and level-headed. Jeichi was one of the few who kept us all together physically, mentally, and emotionally. If we didn't have her, we'd have lost hope. Years ago, I kept out the female I'd seen. She would scold me for getting distracted in plain sight. Hazel Coast Epsilon, just 2, heading toward the train. I got scolded anyway, she snapped. You were out of sight, right? You should have worn that stupid wig. Why didn't you wear it? You need to hide your identity every damn day. Kael, you know that? I chewed the inside of my cheek. It was rare that I did forget to wear the itchy black wig to hide my near white hair that stuck out like a rotten tooth amongst the many brown or black-haired heads through neighbors' streets. But today, it had flipped my mind completely. Jeichi elbowed me. Something's up with you. What happened out there? It's nothing, I said too quickly. We reached the end of the hallway, entering what used to be a common area to mingle and have meals. It was a little worse for wear than it used to be, but it filled our needs. Shifters, young and old, milled about, doing much about nothing as the end of the day approached. Soon everyone would disperse to their rooms for the night and hopefully dream of finding freedom again. It was the same dream I had, except mine rode on the back of guilt and the weight of my family's legacy. It's not nothing, Jeichi said, setting the supplies on one of the tables before putting her hands on her hips. I sat my things down and couldn't help but grin down at her. You're such a mom. My 5 offspring remind me every day. She said it seriously, but the corner of her mouth was struggling not to curve toward a smile. And since I've been raising you, we're 7. I shouldn't have to baby you 20 years later. She poked my chest. So tell me what's going on. It was true when I tried to remember what my mother looked like. Jeichi's face was the one that came to mind. Even if she wasn't my mother, she was just as good. And I couldn't lie to her. I gestured for her to follow me to a quiet corner. There were quite a few eavesdroppers around. All right, I sighed, meeting her fierce, dark blue eyes. The Hazel weren't just walking around. They had a female with them. I think they'd kidnapped her. Jackie's brows knitted in confusion. That's unfortunate. How does that matter to us? I inhaled deeply. On the exhale, I said, I think she's from the east. How do you know? I'd never seen blonde hair and blue eyes before, not Moonwake features at all. I'd never seen anyone from the east, Kael. You're skirting the truth. I think they're back. The voice echoed in the room. What was left of Moonwake stirred awake at the return of the patrol as they filed inside. Most went straight to their pups or partners. One male went to Jera and another came toward me and Jaichi. What is it? We asked at the same time. He seemed torn on who to directly report to, and I wasn't going to lie to myself that it hurt. After all these years, the pack's faith in me had waned far too much for anyone's liking. Jaichi shoved a palm into my back as a rough cue. The male, a former Epsilon, cleared his throat and said, thankfully, not much to report, but we saw 2 Hazel Coast Guards with a captive who looked like an Easterner. I couldn't help but throw Jaichi a quick told you so glance. She shook her head in good nature. It wouldn't be a concern, he continued, had we not learned that reinforcements from the Eastern Epsilon, some Rosewine, most Ocean Tide, are going to dock here in Nyberg. That was concerning to Aid's son? He nodded once. We can only hope none are sent for Hazel. Agreed. Alpha Cyrus Morven was the instigator of the war 12 years ago, but it was Hazel Coast's Alpha Connor Herrick who brought it to every pack's doorstep, including mine. My resentment was a sleeping beast. It stirred now just thinking about the real monster who murdered my family and nearly annihilated Moonwake. I pushed it back down. I refused to give in to revenge. All I wanted was to protect those I had left. What else? I asked as I noticed the supplies table was still half empty. I felt a prickle of dread. Did the hunt not go well? The Epsilon, though, 20 years, my senior glanced away, as if wanting to avoid telling me something. I opened my mouth to ask again when Jera came over with a dark look on his bearded face. His voice was equally grim. They're looking for you. It sounded like a premonition. I gritted my teeth, Hazel. Behind me, Jakey swore. My mind flew through a dozen scenarios of what to do next. This was something we'd all dreaded for years and prayed would never come. I looked around the room at all the shifters I'd grown up with or watched grow up. All the elders who served Moonwake for decades with nothing but faith and love for the Liviana dynasty. We'd lived in a city of blue and white, and now we were hiding in an abandoned hotel. I was supposed to be the savior of our pack, and yet I was putting them all at risk just by standing here. All right, I began, but someone demanded, Where's Rian? My blood froze. Oh no. Where's Rian? I barked at the Epsilon, who winced as if I'd figured out what he was trying to hide. We don't know. My fear was bigger than my anger. How do you not know? We were near ambushed by a few Sun. They held us at knife point and demanded your location. Me. Jera shook his head. They don't know you're the Alpha. Rian told them he was. Looks like the female in the crowd would have to wait. Chapter 7, She-Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Gemma. I'll send for you when I want to know what you taste like. Connor's rough purr sent ice down my veins, but I was so disgusted that I said, I won't let you lick me. His laugh was deep with amusement. I didn't say I would, but that's a brilliant idea. Your skin may be infused with sand and salt. I might enjoy that. You're sick? I wanted to snap at him, but I kept my lips sealed. I belatedly realized what he actually wanted to taste when his gaze traveled downward, mortified and furious. I crossed my legs tighter. Connor laughed again. Maybe I won't have to break you, just pry you open. The door banged against the wall and Raisa's voice saved me. Alpha, she said, and her voice was a remarkable mix of sultriness and assertiveness with an edge of warning, implying there would be a consequence if he ignored her. Cillian requires your superior war intellect. I'm busy with a new toy, Raisa, he growled, his face now inches from mine. She's not what I was promised, but tell me she isn't adequate. Then her hands were smoothing down Connor's broad shoulders, fingers gripping his elbows, and suddenly her face was inches away as she pressed a kiss to his scarred neck, leaving a smudge of red lipstick, and she murmured. She's beautiful, in my opinion, she murmured, but you don't want her yet. She hasn't even bathed in roses. If you really want to taste something, taste me. In my peripheral, Raisa's hand slid down Connor's torso toward his crotch. He growled again, this time in male satisfaction. He released me, yanking Raisa's chest to his hands, pushing her skimpy dress aside to grab her almost bare ass and burying his face in her neck to kiss her. So passionately that it looked like he was eating her, making exaggerated, pleasured noises deep in his throat. I met Raisa's sea-glass gaze. It was flat and disinterested. I narrowed my brows in a question. She mouthed back, "It's okay." "My lord," she hummed with a soft laugh, and I realized I was in the presence of a true actor who completely fooled her audience. You know, I don't like others watching. Connor retracted with an ugly sucking sound. Raisa plastered a demure look on her face. Her lips sweet, her eyes smooth and adoring. How could I forget? He smacked her backside so hard, she winced, but he didn't notice or care. Where's the old bastard waiting? The war room, of course, Raisa simpered. You've had too much wine, haven't you, my lord? Connor kissed her roughly on the mouth. It's a day to celebrate with my oldest bottle. His eyes cut to me. She's worth more than she looked. I'll train her. Well, Connor's grin was fanged. Do not disappoint me. Have I ever? Raisa purred back. He released her and crossed the massive room in half the steps I would have to take. It let me see his full outfit, a black silk shirt tucked into black jeans, which was surprisingly modern, but the jewelry was crude even from a distance. An armband around his bicep was made solely of wolf canines, and a small braid in his hair was strung with more. Teeth pried from the mouths of his enemies. I expect you to be in my room in an hour, Rose. Oh, and introduce her to the other. She dipped her head, of course. Alpha? He waved a dismissive hand and closed the door behind him. The second it slammed shut, Raisa said, "If you vomit on this floor, I swear." I shook myself, feeling dazed, but not enough to puke. There wasn't much in my stomach anyway. "I won't throw up, thank you, Raisa. You saved me before breakfast. You probably don't want a life debt, do you?" Her laugh was abrupt, making me think she didn't expect my dry humor. That's the last thing anyone wants or needs around here. Wheat, are you all right? The threat to lick me? With normal, expect rude remarks like that. It's all he's made of. Come on, let's take you back upstairs. I let her guide me back out, and I wasn't one bit upset about it. Her sideways smirk confirmed it. If you play it right, you can get a male to do anything you want, and they'll never know. The key is making it seem like they are the ones making the decision. And flattery, I guess. She looked at me with raised brows. Quick learner. This is the harem hallway, though. We just call it the harem. She told me after we ascended the stairs at the first door, painted black. She said, "This is the parlor." I tripped on the carpet. "I'm sorry, the what?" The haremer, Raisa repeated without missing a beat. She nudged me directly in front of the door and turned the knob. It swung open, and my jaw dropped at what I saw inside. Outside the walls of the Hazelstone fortress was nothing but gray dust and misery. But on the inside was a marvel of skilled craftsmanship. The foyer was inlaid with gold, the outlook dawned in velvet sunset. And this room was stunningly and luxuriously black. The walls, the plush rug in the center of a couch pit said couches, black velvet. The tables, candles, and decorative vases were all black. There was even an hourglass on a black stand with black sand. The half-dozen girls were decked in black, too. All their giggling and chatting stopped when they turned to see me, their smiles dropping into frowns. I felt a lively atmosphere turn bleak. Dessert flowers, Raisa announced, placing her delicate hands on my shoulders. This is Gemma Brooks. Treat her with as much respect as you do. Hi, I said. I received a half-hearted hello in return, and they went back to whatever they were doing. They probably didn't like my gaping at their lack of clothing. Most of the young females' skin was pale, stark against all the darkness, making it easy to find them. None of them could have been much older than me, and some looked much younger. And that didn't sit well with my morality. Raisa tatskaged and turned me by my shoulders to the next door over. This one, a red as dark as cherries, and said, "This is my room." When she opened it, I almost breathed a sigh of relief at the modesty, finally, something not over, the top to blow my tiny, humble mind. Everything was made of that dark cherry red, but it wasn't overwhelmingly so like all the other rooms. This looked the hummest and most lived in, like it wasn't just a place to show wealth. Sit, Raisa ordered, jerking her chin to the couch pit. I obeyed. A moment later, she said beside me, crossing a leg over her knee. Goddess damn her, even that was elegant. I protect those girls. Connor is volatile, and I'm the only one who can calm him down, but I only protect them if I know them. I felt like I was being interrogated. My head was spinning so much already that I just said, okay. Raisa leaned toward me. She smelled like roses, and the remnants of Connor's musk scents calming enough that I could almost ignore the deadly gleam in her eyes and the glimpse of long canines when she growled. She said, "You weren't who you're supposed to be. He doesn't go for females like you, especially not Eastern ones, so who the hell are you?" Completely alone in an enemy's personal home, I knew I needed to make friends. Right now, Raisa was my only and best option to help me survive, and if I was too bold to wonder, I think she wanted to help me too. I kept her glare. I really am Gemma Brooks. The truths I had to tell, I wasn't afraid to tell, because somehow I knew that Raisa would keep it to herself, instead of exposing me to Connor. But no, I'm not who he was apparently promised. I switched places with my cousin Lynbrook. Raisa narrowed her eyes further, searching my face for lies. Keep going. Her father, my uncle, is the beta of Oceanhide. She's only 16. So I rambled the whole story, not leaving out a single detail up until this point. And when I finished, I slouched on the couch, as if telling my adventure had used up the last reserves of my energy. Raisa straightened her spine, still appraising me with a wary stare for a long moment. She was silent as she ingested everything I told her. Then she said quietly, "I told you us daughters are worth far less." I huffed a delirious laugh. I learned that very quickly. Finally, she broke the tense link between us and sighed, resting her cheek on the back of the couch. "You must be overwhelmed." "Yeah. You were expecting to be a single breeder." "Yeah." Raisa's look softened. "Technically, you still are. You just share the duty with me and 6 others. I didn't like the word duty in that context. I just want to know what Lynn was traded for. Oceanside is loyal to Sun Mountain, not Hazel Coast, so did Haveloop make some kind of underhanded deal with Connor. Raisa lifted one shoulder briefly. If it was me, I would keep the wondering at the back of my mind and focus on the present. Look too much into the past, she shrugged again, but this one wasn't so careless, it comes back to bite. So spare yourself from the pain. The words spoke of a deeper message that I figured she didn't want to get into. But then she sighed and relented. It's rare that the truth is spoken around here, so I'll repay you. I sat back up when she said I used to be the daughter of an alpha. My eyes widened and then followed hers as they looked over my shoulder. There was a short, wide glass box on the side table beside her four-poster bed with what looked like a torn piece of fabric. I couldn't get a good look from this distance. Duskfall, a day's trip away from Rosewendpack's borderline. We spent so much time, so much effort into shoring up our defenses in the height of the war. But in the end, it didn't matter. When she looked at me, there were tears threatening in her eyes. My father promised me in exchange for leaving the rest of our pack alone. Connor agreed, and I was dragged away screaming by one of his Epsilon as he shook my father's hand and then slashed his throat open. I'm sorry, Raisa. I breathed in genuine care. The West was so cruel. The actress sniffed and smiled, tossing her curls over her shoulder, eyes hardening into something determined and clever. Now I feftique my father's murderer. What a sick life. Call me a consort or a slave or a harem keeper, but I'm a wolf above all else. I don't want revenge for my father. Gemma Brooks, I want. There was a knock on the door. I was already tired of knocking on doors. Come in, Raisa, called, all trace of rebellion gone in a blink. Oh, my lord, you're early. Connor stood in the doorway, the front of his shirt drenched. It only took a moment for the reek of alcohol to hit my nose. Even from across the room, his gold eyes burned hotter than flame. You pricked, pointing at me. Take off your clothes now. Chapter 8. Mold. Gemma, take off your clothes. Connor barked savagely, storming into the room. I jerked to my feet and planted them firmly on the ground, but before he could reach me, Raisa put herself between us, slamming her palms into Connor's chest to stop his rampage. Alpha, what happened? I just sewed that lovely. He shoved her aside as easily as if she weighed nothing, but she was too graceful of a she-wolf to simply fall aside. She recovered within a second and pushed me behind her, her own feet planted in front of the male who stole her and murdered her family. Surprisingly, he jerked to a stop even though he was a full foot taller than her and twice as broad. The alpha looked down at her as if he wanted to obey, but was very close to tipping over the edge. Raisa held power over him. Did he know it, or was he just one member of the fooled audience? She brushed a piece of damp hair off his scarred cheek, her fingers caressing his jaw. What happened, my lord? She crooned. Shall we bathe together again? Just think of it. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she lifted herself onto her toes to skim her lips over his throat. Your palms over my breasts, sliding down to my thighs. I don't mind where your fingers go. For a moment, Connor's eyes glazed as she tricked him into imagining the fantasy, but then he shook his head and snapped his teeth in her face. I know what you like. I want to know what she likes. Raisa spun on me. Her voice was still sultry when she demanded, well, girl, what do you like? What do you desire from our gracious alpha? He can make your dreams come true, and you don't have to do a thing. Goaded on by Raisa's dark shift, he curled his lip over his sharp canines. I'll do whatever you want, me too, and more. What's her name? Gemma. Connor laughed huskily. Gemma, you look more like a waif than a wolf. Raisa, make her eat more than the others. You know, I don't like them skinny. Of course, purred Raisa. She must be hungry. She goes to the kitchen to eat lamb, and you eat me. How does that sound, my lord? She asked, stroking her fingers across his collarbone. It's far too late in the night to be pestering her. She came all the way from the east just to please you. Let her have one good night's sleep before she lets you devour her. Devour, Connor repeated with hunger. Enough with the eating, I wanted to shout, but Raisa's pointed look that only I could see told me I shouldn't. Instead, I bit my tongue and said I taste delicious after 8 hours of rest. Her widened eyes told me that she couldn't believe the audacity of the comment. I'm hungry now, Connor growled, forcefully pushing Raisa away. Take that damn dress off, or I'll rip it off. You would like that, wouldn't you? Raisa was struggling to fend him back, trying to stall. You're not a virgin, are you? No, I said. Connor's grin widened. Good. Maybe you can show me something only Easterners know. I'd lost my virginity when I was 16 to an Upsillian male who left to live in Lyrehaven after his graduation. We'd hooked up fairly often before that, but never really made an official relationship of it. I knew early on that I only liked him sexually. Honestly, he had a very dull personality, but he did know how to make me moan. Connor Herrick was a conqueror. He conquered land packs and weaker shifters. He conquered lovers too. If he had a harem, and that meant he was a good lover, having slept with goddess, knew how many female. Meanwhile, I'd come from a seaside village and only knew one male. I doubt it, I said, already forgetting the filter Raisa wanted me to have. She rolled her eyes in exasperation. Let me teach her first, Alpha, she said, her voice taking on an edge, so she may pleasure you in all the ways you like. Connor shoved off his shirt. Let her look at what you're stalling from. I hadn't had sex in 2 years, a fact that Carrie had pointed out many times, rubbing it into my face, despite her not getting any action lately either. We'd often sit on the square's fountain and shamelessly ogle any male who wandered by. There had surprisingly been a decent amount of good-looking shifters in Opal Springs. Even though I'd only been with one male, I knew what I liked and had a list of what I'd always wanted to try, but couldn't. And if I thought my packmates' bodies looked good, I obviously hadn't seen the beast of the Wests because Moon Goddess smite me and my traitorous instincts. He was a real specimen to ogle at. Connor Herrick, the most dangerous, volatile male on 2 different continents, wanted to have sex with me. Rather, he wanted me to have sex with him. I'd taken Lynn's place to be a breeder that involved sex. I'd said I didn't mind giving him an heir if he could show me the rest of the world. Well, there were 2 problems with my silly expectations. 1, I'd been half joking when I said that first thing. 2, it didn't seem like the West had much to offer except dust and war. I'd been half serious about the heir part, partly because I hadn't had sex in 2 years and my body craved it from someone. Anyone, it was stupidly desperate, and now I realize I'd bit off more than I could chew if the male who would be the father of my pups was a warmonger. I wasn't an actor like Raisa was, but I could try, at least a little bit. I could let Connor pleasure me, and I could pleasure him, and I'd work my way into getting something else out of it. All I really wanted was freedom from my boring, going nowhere life. Was this my chance to be someone completely new? Someone reckless, who embraced the archaic? Maybe it was because I wondered if becoming one with Connor's magnificent body would be an education in more things than one. Or maybe I was just slap happy and needed those 8 hours of sleep. There was unfortunately no denying that my interest was piqued by Connor's upper half. That was just pathetic, being turned on by just a torso. But it was a nice torso. Connor was pure muscle, tan skin glistening with the spilled alcohol, scars of varying sizes and lengths flecking his pectorals, ribs, and sides. My eyes traveled from his collarbone all the way down to his low-slung pants that didn't cover the veiny V between his hip bones. Sweet goddess above, smite me in my damn desires, twofold, my hometown fling was nothing compared to this alpha. Connor and Raisa were both watching me, waiting for a reaction bigger than my widened eyes. I wasn't sure what they expected me to do or say, but words were failing me when I looked just a little lower than his hip bones, drunk or not. Lusting for me or someone else, his sea cheekock, was hard. Do you like what you see? Connor asked. His voice rough. I can show you more. When he started to tug his waistband down, Raisa put herself in front of him, blocking him from my view. If you're going to do this, do it elsewhere. Killjoy, Connor growled, then barked at me. Go wait in your room, girl. Raisa's eyes flashed with warning, but we both knew I had to obey. I bolted into motion, ducking around the larger-than life shifters to hurry out the door and into my assigned room in the harem's quarters, which Raisa had pointed out to me on the way in. It looked more like a prison cell. I left the door cracked just an inch. I sat at the edge of the bed with my heart pounding. What was Connor going to do? Was he going to abandon pursuing me and have sex with Raisa, or was he just going to follow me here and drop his pants? It came down to one question and its follow-up inquiry. Did I want to have sex with Connor Herrick? There was a difference between F-tricking and making love, and he didn't seem like the type to know. There was males in general, seemed not to care, as long as they got what they wanted. I buried my face in my hands and tried to untie the giant knot of thoughts in my head, at the same time trying to divide my morality back into right and wrong. I was disgusted with him and his reign of terror, just knowing he killed Raisa's family in front of her, even if she hadn't sounded particularly upset about her father, was enough for me to be completely repulsed. And I was disgusted with myself for even considering wanting to have sex with a murderer. Then I wondered, if I refused to give him what he wanted, would he kill me too? I had no plans of dying anytime soon, especially not on foreign soil by the claws or teeth of a dictator. I dropped my hands, as long as it wasn't Lynn. I had to keep reminding myself of that to keep me grounded. When I wondered how I'd ended up in this messed up situation, I was here because I had to protect my cousin. I stiffened when the door creaked, when it banged open and Connor stood there with his shirt still off and his pants zipper all the way down. I jerked to my feet. Alpha, I breathed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking my face between his calloused hands, and I thought that he would forcibly kiss me, but instead, he gently rested his forehead to mine and murmured, "I'm sorry, love." I let the wine get to my head. Connor's breath was hot and reeked of a wine that I wasn't familiar with. His body pressed to mine so I could feel every hard rid. One hand slid into my hair, fingers tangling in the strands, tugging on the ribbon. Underneath the alcohol, I scented his arousal. Wolf shifters were libidinous creatures. We gave off certain smells that attracted one to another, and it was impossible to ignore that pull. It was body over mind, making even the most sensible shifters dizzy with desire, whether they liked the other or not. Connor, I breathed. That's not my name. That was a mistake. He released me roughly and took several steps back. His gold eyes were glazed, but they burned with a different kind of fire, the kind females feared, not enraptured by when he growled. My consorts, do not address me casually. We will continue this when you find your manner. Chapter 9. Breeding with the enemy. Gemma. Connor left me with the feeling that he dunked a bucket of cold water over my head. I closed and locked the door, resting the back of my head on it. I'd never prayed to the moon goddess as much as I did in the past few hours, but damn, did I need her luck. I stood on the shore, white sand between my toes, eyes closed to the midnight breeze, breathing in the brine. The lapping of the sea lulled my restless heart. The ocean was where I belonged, a lonely, bored she-wolf who longed for the freedom of the rest of the world. I sensed a presence behind me. I whirled around. Above him was the silky blue sky dotted with dim stars. The moon was huge and full, blindingly bright. It limned his leanly muscular frame in a halo of white as he padded toward me. But I wasn't afraid of the stranger. I waited for him, waiting to see his face as he came closer. He stopped a foot away. He was a foot taller, too. So I tipped my chin up while he tipped his down. I matched his fond smile. Hi, I breathed. He was so handsome, up close and strong nose, strong jaw with a shadow of stubble, a kind mouth that spread into a wider smile. Hello. This is a far cry from that sad city, isn't it? I asked conversationally, gesturing to the endless beach and sea. He laughed. That's for sure. It's beautiful here. I've always wondered what the ocean looked like. My smile faded. You've never seen the ocean? No, said the handsome stranger with a somber shake of his head. I almost couldn't comprehend that. We can't have that without thinking. I took his hand and tugged. Come on, the water's beautiful. All right, he laughed, setting into a jog to follow me into the shallows up to our ankles. Oh, it's cold. I laughed too, very aware of the fact that I was still holding his hand. You get used to it. Feel the sand between your toes. It tickles, doesn't it? It does. It's slimy and dry at the same time. How does that work? I shrugged one shoulder. My smile was so wide, my cheeks ached. Who are you? He didn't seem to mind holding my hand. He splashed around in the water, a little reminding me of a curious pup. I was wondering the same thing about you. I'm Gemma. Gemma, he repeated warmly, the reflective glow of the waves making patterns dance on his face. He was beautiful, and suddenly my chest constricted, because what if I never saw him again? My name is... I jerked awake with a dragging gasp, sitting upright, sweat beading my forehead, my heart pounding. The moonlit beach was just a dream. I was still in my prison cell room. I fell back on the pillow as my vitals settled back to normal. Why had such a peaceful dream wakened me as if it was a nightmare? You're awake, finally. I jumped again at the voice of the maid from yesterday. She was standing a few feet away, which was rather disconcerting. Were you watching me sleep? No, I was about to shake you awake. I am glad for my own sake that I did not have to. Now get up and get ready for the day. Hurry, or there will be consequences. I did not want to face any consequences, not from this scary, tiny female or Connor, who I prayed had come down from his drunken state. So I climbed quickly out of bed and took the clothes the maid already had in her grasp to shed the skimpy silk slip that I'd slept in behind the separation screen. You missed breakfast, so you will have to wait for lunch, which is in 10 minutes. The maid said, Alpha Connor instructed me to tell you to forget his words and never speak of your encounter to anyone. Miss Raisa asked me to bring you down to the garden after lunch, which she will not be joining. She will instruct you on what your days will look like from now on. If you need anything, simply ring one of the bells and an attendant will come to assist you. I addressed each of her sentences mentally. It was hard to forget an encounter like that. I hoped Raisa was okay. Who knew what happened between her and Connor after he ordered me out of her room, and I wasn't aware of any bells, but I supposed I would see them eventually. I dressed in a surprisingly modest outfit of black pants and a dark red shirt, even if it bared much of my breast. The maid ordered me to sit on the vanity stool. I looked quite terrible. I thought I'd struggle to fall asleep with all the unfamiliarity, but I'd passed out almost immediately out of exhaustion. You slept for 11 hours, the maid remarked, her voice steadfastly flat and emotionless as she made my hair into a single long braid and not a gull's nest. I guess I needed to recover a little. I laughed under my breath. She didn't find that amusing. What's your name? I asked her reflection. Sharon Trissette, Cherslet. That's pretty. I do not like small talk. Sorry. With a final rough tug, Sharon tied a red ribbon at the end of the braid. Follow me. She turned on her heel and set a brisk pace. I hurried to keep up as she led me back down the spiral staircase onto the floor below where the hallway only had 2 doors, one on either side, directly across from each other. One was just a regular-sized dark wood, but the other was a double set of black wood with the Hazel Coast sigil carved into it. Sharon opened them as if they didn't look like they weighed 100 pounds. What was behind them took my breath away, just like every other room I'd been shown so far. Just how much wealth and labor did Connor abuse to build this much luxury? It looked like the dining hall at the school with a stupidly long table with a dozen chairs on either side and ends, large dishes lined in the center, all below, 3 black chandeliers. The floor was black marble with red veins, so polished that I could see my reflection. Around the perimeter of the hall were 3 Upsilon guards, each wearing their uniforms and intimidating masks. They gave off a presence that dimmed the lively mood coming from the 6 chattering and laughing girls at the table. And just like last night, when they saw me, they went silent and cold. "Sit here," Sharon ordered, pointing at the seat at the head of the table. I sank into the seat, its back a full foot taller than me, feeling like a crab, surrounded by hungry gulls, with all the girls glaring at me. I looked down at my empty plate, but then I gritted my teeth and looked back up, straightening my shoulder. I wouldn't be intimidated, I just had to keep reminding myself of Raisa's advice before I was eaten alive. They seemed unimpressed with my shift into determination, but did go back to their conversation. I sighed inwardly and turned my attention to the bountiful selection of food. Large plates were laden with several kinds of meats, a stack of a fruit I'd never seen before, black metal jugs of whatever drink, all set amongst desert flowers, artfully placed ribbons, and tiny black glass figurines of wolves. In the midst of a war, Alpha Connor, Herrick still had someone to make glass work. On the other end of the hall was yet another set of double doors, one cracked open, and a male stuck his head in to announce, "Alpha will not be joining today's meal. You may eat." The girls squealed and started loading their plates as they stood to reach for things. I got a better look at all of them. They all wore skimpy black silk that fit their hourglass figures, and their hair was long and softly curled. 2 of them, however, were obviously pregnant. They didn't look much older than me. "Eat," Sharon barked at me suddenly. I jerked into motion, grabbing the closest meat and fruit with large tongs. The jug, an arm's reach away, was water. I poured it into a goblet and chugged the entire thing, ignoring more stares when I set it down. If they were going to stare unabashedly, then I was going to be equally shameless. Without using utensils, I tore the meat apart with my teeth, sinking them into pieces of fruit, downing it all fervently to make up for the lack of food the past few days. I didn't know what animal the meat used to be or what the fruits were, but they were equally delicious and rich in flavor. Juice from both dribbled down my chin, but I couldn't give a damn if I was going to be given a feast. Then I was going to enjoy it. I thought Easterners were supposed to be cultured. I heard one of the young females murmur. The one beside her huffed a judgmental laugh. "She probably thinks we are the savages." I swallowed the last bite of fruit. I met the gaze of the second girl, not breaking eye contact, and licked the juice from my fingers. Her jaw clenched, and she went back to her plate. "Alpha Connor treats you well. You're all very beautiful. Are you all from the West?" I made my voice as conversational as possible. Raisa couldn't be my only friend if I was going to live here amongst all the other consorts. There was no use ducking my head or pretending I was better, because that's what they were thinking, weren't they? I was an outsider from an at-peace continent. They must think I'm of higher value to Connor than them if he plucked me from there. No one seemed to want to answer me, but the girl who was the first to judge said yes. We were all, her gaze flicked to the Upsilon guards ahead of her and then continued. Gifted by our Alpha, gifted or stolen. Picking up on the careful choice of words, I was equally careful to ask, "Are you all daughters of Alpha?" Their attitudes subtly shifted from mild dislike to solemn. They all gave imperceptible nods. The first girl quickly covered it up by saying, "We're better off in the safety of our Alpha Lord's fortress. It's impenetrable, so the war can't touch us." She smiled. It was only half forced. "As his breeders, we're happy to exchange our bodies for protection from Cyrus's forces." One of the pregnant girls rested a hand on her belly. He gives a safe future for our pup. Are you ready to give him offspring? The judgmental girl asked with a challenge. I hope you're not as fragile as you look. Did I look fragile? I used a cloth napkin to clean my mess civilly before I could open my mouth to respond. The male who'd come in earlier appeared again to announce Miss Raisa's asking for Gemma Brooks in the garden. The garden was a large square of flourishing desert plants and flowers on the north side of the fortress and overlooked the bluff. In its center was a black velvet chaise upon which sat Raisa. As Sharon walked me over, an older male rose from crouching in front of her, patted her shoulder, and nodded to me as he passed by. Something felt off. I hurried to Raisa and sat next to her. I was tempted to take her hands in mine, the way I used to with Carrie when she was upset, because Raisa was upset. When I met her eyes, they glimmered with tears. Sharon had already gone, Raisa? I demanded quietly. What's wrong? What happened? I knew she didn't trust me yet. She didn't skirt the truth when she whispered, I'm pregnant. Chapter 10. Bad luck. Rian and Tara were the only blood-related family I had left. I wasn't born to be a king, but I was forced to pick up the bloody broken crown whose weight demanded our pack return to its former glory. It was hard, to say the least, to lead the ruins of a pack from despair to hope, but even harder to keep track of a 21-year-old brother. I knew he had good intentions. He wanted our old life back just as much as the rest of us. But he was reckless and impatient about it. He was 9 when the war broke out. The murder of our parents and siblings changed him. He seemed to take it far harder than I did. Even when the title of Alpha went from our oldest brother down to me, the second youngest of 7 pups. Ever since we had to flee from our home in Moonwake, he favored acting out, even when it risked our existence being discovered by the enemies. I ducked past Jara and stalked toward the entrance tunnel. We have to go find him. Whoa, hold it, Kael. Jara barked, his hand grabbing my upper arm and yanking me back. He was a big wolf, twice as broad as me, and did so easily. We can't just take off to Sun and Hazel. You are supposed to be dead. His voice rose, booming into the now silent room. Do you have any idea how many wolves are after your head? Your pack needs to rest on your shoulders right now. They don't need you to be traded for a stupid amount of money. I pulled free. Every shifter had their eyes on us now. I had to be careful of my every action, my every word, because it defined me as a leader. A good or a bad one. They all trusted my father and all of his forefathers for 2 centuries before Hazel Coast or Sun Mountain even existed. Going to save Rian from serious danger was admirable. Usually Alpha sat back and sent others to do his dirty work. But it also labeled me as reckless, putting reaction before thought. Who wanted to risk following a pack leader who jumped into a pit of starved wolves before considering smarter options? Like listening to a former beta. I asked as calmly as I could. After a decade, you'd think I'd have figured this shit out. After a decade, I should be established and trusted by my own packmates. Instead, I was still being judged every single day and still letting Jera and Jaishi make the big calls. We can't just let him be kidnapped and killed. My throat constricted, unless they'd killed him already. Jera was right. The price for any Leviana was enough to rebuild our family manor. That made it both fun and frustrating for Hazel and Sun. They didn't know if we even were alive or dead. We joked for years, calling ourselves ghosts, our white hair, adding irony. If they believed that he was me, he could be killed. If they found out he lied, he could be killed. Or the Sun could be smarter than we'd like them to be and use him as bait or leverage to draw me out. We won't let him be killed, Jacka said, her hand on my arm, gentle but reassuring. Let's talk about this elsewhere. I put on my best alpha face as I strode past the onlookers, the mask my dad used to wear when addressing his packmates. It was a genuine mask that could be trusted. I wanted the same shifters who trusted him to put their trust in me and their faith that I could bring them all back to our homeland. Jara, Jackie, and the elder Epsilon rarely entered what we had dubbed the conference room behind me. There was a large circular table, beaten up over the years, that was utilized as a tool for planning things from tomorrow's patrol to a full-on system of survival. We stood around it now. My palms braced the hardwood surface as my arms started to shake. This was bad, really, really bad. The scope of the situation was big and ready to flick down the first domino. Jackie was, of course, the voice of reason. Let's go over this again. We've been in hiding for more than a decade. Your parents and Qtron sacrificed themselves so you, Alara, and Ryan could escape. Posters have been out calling for the deaths of the last members of the Liviana dynasty and the last hope of the Moonwake pack. No one has been able to find the two of you thanks to everyone's joined vigilance. You, Kael, she continued, meeting my gaze from across the table, are more valuable than any of us. What you stand for, what you mean for our future, we can't afford to lose you. But Rian is invaluable as an heir and as an adopted family member. We're just as scared as you and can't waste what little time we already have. That being said, she looked at her brother, whose mood had soured since we came back from the square. He felt responsible for Rian too, having promised our father to protect us at the cost of his own life. He was likely beating himself up for not being stricter for all the times Rian just took off and wasn't seen for a day or two. We'll find him, said Jara darkly, eyes cutting to me, but you're wearing that ugly wig. We talked through the night until we were satisfied with the plan of action, which wasn't much of a plan considering we had no details to go on. But for Rhea's input that they'd been on the north side of Nyberg, where indeed Sun Mountain's soldiers seemed to like to lurk. They could have taken Rian anywhere in the city. Not to mention the possibility that they'd left it behind and went back to their stronghold further north. We waited until just after dawn. Me, Raisa, and two other Epsilon wore poorly made black wigs to hide our white hair. That was a dead giveaway of who we were. Moonwake shifters were as good as prized game. Kill one, and you'd be drowning in reward money. Just before I swung myself over the railing in the atrium, someone grabbed my sleeve. I turned. It was Diana. Her eyes were red from tears, her vivid blue irises glistening with that. Despite her trembling lower lip, her jaw was set tight, her expression defiant. Bring him home? I pulled her into a hug. My body dwarfed her much smaller one. She stifled a sob against my chest. Putting her at arm's length, I bent at the waist to wipe a tear off her cheek. "Oh, I will, I promise." She nodded, not having much else to say but a rest.
Okay.
We'd gotten good at acting inconspicuous, each of us leaving the hideout at different times to avoid appearing out of nowhere in a cluster. We all made our way to the square, where we coincidentally ran into each other to search as a unit. I scanned every face in the crowd, checking for new posters on the sides of buildings, even hoping to see a Sun Mountain sigil. If they were going to use him as bait or ransom, there was a chance they'd have made some kind of note to get my attention. But nothing was out of the ordinary. Not even a strange Eastern girl. I joined up with Jara in one of the alleyways. "This isn't going well," I said, scratching the back of my head. I wanted to yank the stupid wig off and grind it into the dusty road. Jara didn't respond. He just leaned against the building wall and glowered. I never expected him to try to be a damn hero. I huffed a humorless laugh. Neither did I. "His newfound selflessness is going to get us all killed," growled Raisa, as he appeared at the other end of the alley. Jara curled his lip. "Watch it." My jaw tightened. The last thing we needed was infighting. We can't let tempers get in the way of a rescue mission. The last time we had to rescue a Leviana, they died. I wasn't fast enough to stop Jera before he roared and launched himself at Red Eye, who wasn't quick enough to dodge Jera's punch straight to his nose. I saw a spray of blood spurt as Raisa stumbled back at the sheer force, staining his mouth and Jera's fist. He spit onto the ground and wiped his face with the back of his hand. Losing Elora was fucking terrible, Raisa growled, making Jera tense even further. I'm as loyal to that family just as much as you are. He jerked his chin at me. But I won't lose you. Don't forget, we lost Ayla too. Diana was never the same after that. His eyes flicked to Jera. Go ahead and run to your deaths. I won't be a part of it. Coward, Jera snapped. If you're as loyal as you claim, you would run with us. We pledged our allegiance and our lives. There's no backing out of that. His voice darkened into something lethal. And don't use my mate as an excuse. I put myself between the two, holding out my arms in case they tried to go at it. Enough arguing, Ray. If you feel this strongly, I won't stop you from going back to the hideout. His jaw clenched, looking between me and Jera in deliberation. I just think I added as I dredged up my alpha courage that your loyalty to me should extend to Rian. He's a little shit, and he should have been less reckless, but he could be killed. It's our duty, mine most of all, to save him and bring him back, because he's the future of Moonwake, too. My forefathers have asked you to follow them into battle without hesitation. That's what I'm asking you now, calling on your loyalty to have my tail when we plunge into the unknown. I am your alpha. Will you honor my request? Raisa held my gaze, which I hoped was imploring. I'd asked this of Vasilian, my Epsilon, before, but it had never been this serious before. The two others were lingering behind Raisa. I met their eyes too, and it took much less time for them to nod and touch their palms to their chest in a salute of promise. At last, Raisa sighed, fine. My pride can't say no. I couldn't help the swell of my own pride in accomplishing the feat of securing loyal followers. Great, is your nose all right? I'll live. Jera, I asked, turning to him. He had walked to the end of the alley, his back to us. Dread crept up my spine. What is it? Son was all he said, 5 of them. I patted over and peered over his shoulder to where he subtly pointed. Indeed there were, and a little close for comfort. We should go around, I suggested, get far enough behind them and then follow, see if they can lead us somewhere. Jera grunted in agreement, and the 5 of us moved to the other end of the alley to peer out. As we did, I realized we had shit luck because 5 Hazel Coast Epsilon were right there. I was shoved back behind the others as one of them barked. Who did you just hide? We're just minding our own business, Jera began, but another guard snapped. Why are you covered in blood, and is that? The first guard lurched forward and grabbed a fistful of Ray's hair, his wig. My blood went cold. When Jera punched him, it dislodged the cheap thing, showing more than half his real hair. Moonwake a third breathed, Oliviana. Catch him. Jera barked. I didn't need to be told twice. Jera and the others jostled with the enemy guards as they tried to get past them. It was clear they didn't intend to flee with me, but I yelled, come on. We'll be fine. I hesitated. I couldn't let Jera and my other pack members be hurt or captured too. Rian was one too many to lose. No one was shifting into their wolf forms, but that didn't mean they didn't have claws. I heard yelps of pain following the sound of shredding flesh. I knew the sound all too well. No, I couldn't just run away. But I only took 2 steps before a fist snatched the collar of my shirt and yanked me back so hard, I almost flew. My skull hit the packed dirt ground when I fell, coughing dust and blinking it from my eyes. I heard husky, barking laughter. My vision cleared somewhat to see several Epsilon leering over me with savage smiles. One of them was holding my sad black wig. "We found a dead king, my friends," one of them said. "Let's take him back to Connor." My last thought before they knocked me out was of the mystery girl. This part has ended. Thank you for listening. If you would like to continue listening to the next part, please let me know by leaving a comment.